The city glittered that night, not with stars, but with glass towers and restless ambition. Neon lights spilled onto wet pavements as expensive cars hummed through the rain-soaked streets. Somewhere beneath those towers, in the part of town the wealthy never looked twice at, a young girl named Clara Mason huddled under a broken bus shelter. She was 16, wearing a coat 3 sizes too big and holding a crumpled paper bag that carried her life's possessions, a photo of her late mother, a half-eaten sandwich, and a Bible with torn pages. The storm didn't bother her anymore. She'd been weathering bigger storms since her mother died 2 years ago, leaving her alone in a world that didn't care. But that night, destiny had plans, quiet, invisible plans that would rewrite her life. Across town, inside a skyscraper that seemed to touch the clouds, Alexander Royce stood before a wall of glass. He was one of those names people whispered with awe, a billionaire investor, founder of Royce Global, the man who'd built empires from ashes. But wealth had not given him peace. The photo on his desk, a smiling woman holding a baby boy, was the only reminder of what he'd lost. His wife and child had died 5 years ago in a car crash that money couldn't prevent. He'd buried himself in work ever since, building fortunes to escape the emptiness that lived in his chest. But that night, something restless stirred in him, a feeling he hadn't known in years. He didn't know that somewhere out there, under the same rain, fate was preparing a meeting that would change both their lives. Clara watched as people rushed by, umbrellas spinning, shoes splashing through puddles. She reached into her bag and opened her tattered Bible to a verse her mother always read. "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord." Her voice broke as she whispered it aloud, trying to believe it still mattered. At that very moment, a sleek black Rolls-Royce slowed near the curb. Inside sat Alexander, silent, his driver waiting for the light to change. His eyes, distant and tired, caught sight of a girl in the rain, soaked, shivering, yet sitting upright with a strange dignity. Something about her struck him. Maybe it was the way she was staring up at the sky instead of down at the ground. Maybe it was because for the first time in years, he saw hope where he'd forgotten it existed. When the light turned green, he surprised his driver. "Stop," he said quietly. "Sir," the man asked. "Pull over." The car eased to the curb. Alexander stepped out, the rain tapping against his umbrella. Clara froze when she saw him, tall, tailored in a dark overcoat, his shoes shining like mirrors. He didn't look like anyone from her world. "Are you all right?" he asked. Clara hesitated. "I'm fine, Shalit. You shouldn't be out here alone." "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted, trying to sound brave. "I'll be okay." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Something in her tone, the quiet defiance, reminded him of his son. He took off his coat and handed it to her. "Take this." "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "You can," he replied gently. "You look like you need it more than I do." Clara hesitated, then accepted it. The warmth of the coat made her eyes sting with tears she didn't want to show. "Do you have family?" he asked. She looked down. "No, not anymore." He nodded slowly. "Wait here." He returned to the car, spoke briefly to his driver, and then turned back to her. "There's a shelter on 5th Street. I'll take you there. You'll be safe." Something in his voice, calm, firm, but kind, made her trust him. She climbed into the back seat, unsure if she was dreaming. As the car moved through the rain, Clara looked out the window at the city lights. For the first time in years, she felt seen. The shelter was warm, with faded yellow walls and the smell of soup. Alexander left a donation at the front desk, but before leaving, he turned to her. "Do you have a name?" "Clara," she said softly. "Clara Mason." "Clara," he repeated, as if the name meant something. "Take care of yourself." She nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Royce," he said with a faint smile. "Alexander Royce." Her eyes widened slightly. "You're the Alexander Royce?" He smiled faintly. "Just Alexander tonight." And then he left, or tried to. But as he walked back to the car, something tugged at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just met someone who mattered. Someone whose presence, however brief, had cracked the shell around his heart. Over the next few weeks, life moved in strange patterns. Clara began volunteering at the shelter that took her in. She cleaned, helped serve meals, and read bedtime stories to the younger kids. Everyone liked her, not because of pity, but because of her spirit. Sometimes, she caught her reflection in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. The girl who used to beg for coins was now helping others. Meanwhile, Alexander couldn't forget her. In his world of contracts and boardrooms, her face haunted him, a reminder of humility and faith. One day, during a charity board meeting, he learned that the shelter where he'd taken her was losing funding. "How much do they need?" he asked. "About $100,000 to stay open," his assistant replied. "Send it anonymously," he said without hesitation. But when he visited later to check on the renovation, he saw her again, this time working, smiling, alive. "Mr. Royce," she exclaimed when she saw him. "You came back." He smiled faintly. "Looks like you've been busy." "I'm just helping," she said. "This place saved me. I want to do the same for others." That simple statement disarmed him. In a world where people chase profits, this girl cared only about purpose. Over the months that followed, their paths crossed more often. He began sponsoring educational programs at the shelter, and Clara became one of the coordinators. She had a knack for organization and people. She could calm chaos with a few words. Alexander admired that. One evening, as they stood watching the sunset from the shelter's rooftop, Clara said quietly, "You know, I used to pray that someone would see me. Not for what I had, but for who I was." He turned to her. "And did he answer?" She smiled. "I think he did." Something in his chest tightened, a mixture of pride and guilt. He'd spent years building empires, but this girl, who had nothing, had more peace than he did. It was his assistant, Rachel, who first noticed the change. "You've been spending a lot of time at the shelter," she said one morning, raising an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" he asked mildly. "No, sir. Just unusual. You used to hate those charity visits." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe I was visiting the wrong people." As Clara turned 18, the shelter director encouraged her to apply for college scholarships. But paperwork was tough. She had no family records, no financial sponsor, no address before the shelter. When Alexander found out, he called her to his office. She walked in nervously, surrounded by glass walls and city views. "Sit," he said warmly. "I have an idea." He slid a document across the table. "It's a guardianship request. I want to be your legal guardian, only if you're comfortable with it. It'll help with your education and everything else." Clara froze. "You want to adopt me?" "If you'll have me," he said quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. "Why me?" He leaned back, his voice soft but sure. "Because when I met you, I saw a spark I'd lost long ago. You reminded me that hope isn't dead. It's just waiting for someone to believe in it again." She couldn't speak. She just nodded through tears. And for the first time in years, Alexander Royce felt whole again. From that day on, Clara's life transformed. She moved into the Royce mansion, a place of marble halls and grand staircases. The staff adored her, not because she was the boss's ward, but because she treated them with kindness. She enrolled in business school, determined to learn the ropes of philanthropy and finance. Alexander mentored her himself, teaching her how to read markets, negotiate deals, and use wealth as a tool for impact. "You don't have to be rich to change lives," he told her once. "But when you are, you'd better use it well." The Royce mansion was the kind of place people whispered about. Vast marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and windows that opened to the skyline like a painting. But to Clara, it wasn't the luxury that mattered. It was the peace. She still woke up early, like she used to at the shelter. Only now she made breakfast for the staff and helped arrange flowers in the hallway. The housekeeper, Mrs. Langford, adored her. "You're the only person I've ever seen in this house who doesn't act like they own the world," the older woman said one morning with a smile. Clara laughed softly. "That's because I still remember what it feels like to have nothing." She'd built a new rhythm. Business school during the day, volunteering at the shelter on weekends, and dinners with Alexander in the evenings. Over time, their bond deepened, not as father and daughter by blood, but by choice, by something higher. Yet, not everyone approved. At Royce Global Headquarters, whispers began to stir. Some board members were uneasy. "She's a charity case," one executive muttered. "And now she's attending company meetings?" "Royce is getting sentimental," another sneered. "That girl will ruin his focus." But Alexander ignored them. He saw potential where others saw charity. He gave Clara small roles, reviewing proposals, attending strategy sessions, and learning how philanthropy worked on a global scale. Still, Clara could feel the tension. She noticed the stares, the half-smiles, the subtle questions about her past. And sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she truly belonged in this world of power and privilege. Then came the first test. One morning, while reviewing documents for a charity fund, Clara noticed something odd, a discrepancy in the numbers. Millions were missing from the ledger, reappearing in offshore accounts under a shell company. She hesitated before going to Alexander. He was on a business trip in Dubai, unreachable for 2 days. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something told her to dig deeper. With the help of a young accountant named Daniel, she traced the funds and found the culprit. Victor Hale, Alexander's trusted CFO of 15 years. Victor had been embezzling money through fake charity subsidiaries, hiding behind Alexander's reputation. When she confronted him in the office late one evening, his expression turned cold. "You're making a mistake, girl," he said quietly. "You think you can accuse me and walk away? You're just a stray Mr. Royce picked off the street." Clara's voice trembled, but her conviction didn't. "Maybe, but truth doesn't care where it comes from." He stepped closer, sneering. "If you tell him, I'll destroy you. You have no degree, no family, no past. Who do you think he'll believe?" For a moment, fear flickered in her chest. The same fear she'd felt on those cold nights years ago. But then she remembered her mother's voice, and that verse she used to whisper, "For I know the plans I have for you." She looked him dead in the eye. "Then I guess we'll find out." When Alexander returned 2 days later, she handed him the file, every document, every trail. He sat in silence, reading through the evidence. The air in the room grew heavy. "I trusted him," Alexander said finally, his voice low and broken. Clara reached out. "You can't blame yourself for someone else's greed." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw tears in his eyes. "You just saved my company." "No," she said softly. "You saved me first." The board meeting that followed was brutal. Victor tried to twist the narrative, painting Clara as an ambitious manipulator. Some believed him, but Alexander stood, calm and resolute. "She is more honest than anyone in this room," he said, his voice echoing through the glass hall. "And if you think kindness is a weakness, you don't understand strength." Victor was escorted out that same day, but the damage had been done. Rumors spread in the media, painting Clara as the mysterious orphan who'd taken over the billionaire's empire. Reporters camped outside the gates. The pressure was immense. One evening, as the headlines blared her name, Clara sat by the piano in the grand hall, her hands trembling. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I just wanted to help." Alexander walked in quietly and sat beside her. "You didn't choose the noise, Clara, but you can choose how to face it." "I don't know if I can," she said, tears streaming down her face. He placed a hand over hers. "You already did, when you stood up for what was right. The world's noise doesn't define you. Faith does." Months passed. The storm slowly faded. Clara graduated with honors, and under Alexander's mentorship, launched the Royce Foundation for Hope, a global initiative to support homeless youth and orphan children. She insisted on visiting every site herself, from small schools in Africa to shelters across Europe. The media that once criticized her now called her the angel of the streets. But she never forgot where she came from. She still visited the shelter that had once been her home, bringing food, supplies, and sometimes just her time. And every Christmas, she left a single coat at the old bus shelter where she'd first met Alexander. A quiet reminder that miracles often begin in the rain. 2 years later, Alexander's health began to decline. He was 70 now, his body slowing down even as his mind stayed sharp. Clara stayed by his side through every doctor's visit, every sleepless night. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights, he smiled faintly. Do you remember that night I found you in the rain? She nodded, tears in her eyes. I'll never forget. I thought I was helping you, he said softly. But the truth is, you saved me. You gave me back my faith and my reason to live. Clara's voice broke. You gave me a life I never thought I'd have. He took her hand gently. Promise me something, Clara. Anything. Keep this legacy alive. Not the wealth, the purpose. Remind the world that love, not power, is what changes lives. I promise, she whispered. A few months later, Alexander passed peacefully in his sleep. His will left most of his fortune to the Royce Foundation, naming Clara as its chairwoman. The media called it a miracle story, the orphan who became the heir to an empire. But to Clara, it was never about the money. It was about a promise, to live with purpose, to love without fear, and to give without expecting anything back. Years later, a journalist asked Clara during a charity gala, "Do you ever feel pressure living under the shadow of Alexander Royce?" She smiled, that same quiet, radiant smile she'd worn under the rain all those years ago. "There is no shadow," she said softly. "There's only light, the kind that comes when someone believes in you. And now, it's my turn to pass that light on." As she left the stage, she looked up at the night sky, whispering a prayer of gratitude. Not for wealth, not for fame, but for the journey that began with a single act of kindness. The rain started to fall again that night, softly against the city lights, and somewhere perhaps heaven smiled.